Excellencies, distinguished participants, welcome to the third Global Conference on Strengthening Synergy between the Paris Agreements and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This conference is co-convened by the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs and the Secretariat of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, also known as UN Climate Change. The conference is hosted by Ministry of the Environment of Japan in partnership with the United Nations University and the Institution for Global Environment Strategies. My name is Yuka Tanimoto, and it's my great pleasure to moderate the opening session of this important event. First, I'm honored to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Tsuyoshi Yamaguchi, Minister of the Environment of Japan, who will provide his opening remark and officially open the conference. His Excellency, if you please.
Evening again. Yamaguchi, Minister of the Environment. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to the co-conveners, the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Secretariat, and to the collaborators, the Institute for Global Environment Strategies, IGES, and the United Nations University for organizing this conference. Thank you very much. Today's conference aims to share tangible examples of effective initiatives to achieve the Paris Agreement's 1.5-degree target and the SDGs. Japan's leading decarbonization areas introduced at the special event earlier are good examples of how to solve social issues and at the same time achieve decarbonization while simultaneously stimulating the economy. We are taking concrete steps to create more than 100 leading decarbonization areas in Japan that will reach net zero emissions by 2030 instead of 2050. We would like to create a decarbonization domino that extends all over Japan and further contributes to the decarbonization overseas. For example, the cities of Kuala Lumpur, Tokyo, and Saitama are promoting decarbonization through intercity collaboration. At the same time, innovations such as batteries and steel production using hydrogen become crucial for achieving the decarbonization. Prime Minister Kishida recently announced the creation of GX economic transition bonds to achieve green transformation, including initiatives in leading decarbonization areas. He mentioned 23 trillion yen for this GX economic transition bonds. It's a seed money, so which means it will be expanded 6 times, 7 times, or even 10 times. It will be substantial financial resources. Japan has already begun to map out a grand design to achieve decarbonization. Decarbonizing Japan will contribute to a society where no one is left behind, where everybody is given a chance, which is precisely the concept of the new capitalism of the Kishida administration. Internationally, Japan will join forces with other Asian countries to realize the Asian Zero Emission Community, which Mr. Kishida proposes. Japan will contribute to decarbonizing Asia by mobilizing its technologies, experiences, know-hows, and financing capabilities. One concrete tool for this is the Joint Crediting Mechanism, JCM, a scheme to promote emission reductions in partner countries by introducing advanced decarbonization technologies. To actively utilize the JCM, we aim to expand the number of JCM partners from 17 presently to 30 countries worldwide by 2030. Through the JCM, we will promote the dissemination of cutting-edge technologies to developing countries in Asia and other regions. I am convinced that there will be fruitful exchange of views. There are lots of things we have to do together. I look forward to the lively and active discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Yamaguchi, for your inspiring words. Now, I'd like to invite the co-conveners of the conference to provide their opening remarks. First, Mr. Liu Chenmin, Under-Secretary General, United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. Mr. Chenmin, please, over to you.
Thank you, the moderator. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all participants. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to be here with you at the opening of the third Global Conference on strengthening strategies and strengthening synergies between the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Agreement. I thank His Excellency Mr. Yamaguchi, Minister of Environment of Japan, for hosting the conference in collaboration with the United Nations University and the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies. I would also like to thank my colleague, Mr. Ibrahim Chow, Acting Executive Secretary of UNFCCC Secretariat, for co-convening this important event. Dear colleagues, the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement provide the best framework for tackling today's most pressing challenges, including climate change, poverty eradication, and inequality. Yet, even before the present crisis, we were not on track to realize the SDGs or the goals of the Paris Agreement. And now, much of the progress that we had made, including in reducing poverty, improving human health and well-being, and empowering women and girls, have faced dramatic reversals in the face of the confluent impact of a persistent pandemic and a warming climate, increased conflict, and interlinked food, fuel, and fertilizer crisis triggered by the conflict in Ukraine. As many as 95 million people live in extreme poverty in 2022 compared to pre-pandemic projections. Working poverty has risen for the first time in 2 decades. 1 in 10 people around the world are suffering from hunger. 147 million children missed more than half of their in-class instruction over the past 2 years. Despite accounting for just 39% of total employment in 2019, women made up 45% of job losses in 2020. And evidence suggests that the pandemic heightened their exposure to domestic violence. Over 700 million people are living without electricity, and there are over 2 billion people without clean cooking solutions. On the climate front, current climate pledges made by nations are still well short of what is needed to meet the Paris Agreement and Glasgow Climate Pact, with 1.1 degrees Celsius of warming above pre-industrial levels already reached. Global energy-related CO2 emissions rose by 6% in 2021. A warming climate is increasing the likeliness of extreme weather events. On the present trajectory, by 2030, medium to large-scale weather events are expected to increase by 40% over 2015 levels. Dear colleagues, that's why we must get SDGs on track and keep the goal of 1.5 degrees alive. An integral approach that seeks to strengthen synergies between those two global agendas is critical. This conference builds on the outcomes of the first Climate and SDGs Synergy Conference in 2019 in Copenhagen, and the virtual consultations in 2021 to take stock of practical measures to advance synergetic implementation. Integrated planning, coherent policies, and economic investments designed to meet both the SDGs and the climate changes can generate significant co-benefits and speed up progress. Bold climate actions could yield a direct economic gain of $26 trillion through to 2030, compared with the business as usual increase that can help advance the achievement of the SDGs. Investment in renewable energy technologies, it creates jobs and can spur broad and sustainable social and economic development. Likewise, reducing emissions of greenhouse gases through better transport, food, energy use choices can result in improved health, particularly through reduced air pollution. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, we must leverage all our means for advancing synergetic actions. The UN Ocean Conference held in Lisbon last month generated much needed political commitment and practical solutions towards SDGs and climate action. We must build on this momentum. Later this year, UNFCCC COP27 will present opportunity to showcase more ambition on climate change to get us on the right track. COP15 to the Convention on Biodiversity presents another important platform. Next year, there are several critical milestones, including SDG Summit in September, as well as a global stock take under the Paris Agreement at UNFCCC COP28. The outcomes of this conference, now convened in Tokyo, should help inform these important global milestones. Countries should also seek to harness synergies of the updated nationally determined contributions and the involuntary national and local reviews of the 2030 Agenda to advance SDGs, to raise climate ambition, to leave no one behind, and to accelerate progress on the 2030 Agenda. At the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, we are committed to do our part. First, we will strengthen our efforts to support all stakeholders in strengthening synergies between 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. Second, we will expand the knowledge base, including by enhancing online knowledge platforms and developing a global synthesis on climate and SDG synergies, building on the insights and the lessons gained to date. Third, we will continue to work with UNFCCC Secretariat to convene an annual climate SDGs synergies conference, ensuring that this platform to be continued for shaping integrated solutions. Dear colleagues, let us work together to ensure a truly joined-up approach to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for your important words and leadership that has made this conference possible. Thank you very much. I now invite another co-convener's statement. Mr. Ibrahim Tiao, Acting Executive Secretary, UNFCCC, to deliver his statement. Mr. Tiao, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. And Minister Yamaguchi, my dear friend Liu Zemin, dear colleagues from IGES and UNU, participants, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to once again co-convene with UN-DESA this very important event about the synergies between the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda. One wonders where to start when you talk about synergies between the Paris Agreement and SDGs. Is it clean energy? Is it oceans, health, gender, land, poverty? There is no SDG that does not have any connection with climate change. So this meeting is therefore extremely important. But for me, as acting Executive Secretary of the Climate Secretariat and Executive Secretary of the UN Convention to Combat Desertification, I see much stronger links between land degradation, and climate. And it is extremely important to also consider the links between drought and climate. Currently, Europe is baking. Europe is burning, literally, due to a combination of factors, including drought and climate change. A very concrete example of why we need to work in synergy in combating all the events, including the extreme events that are really wreaking havoc on our life. We are working towards similar goals of collaboration, and we at the UNFCCC applaud all the efforts that are being deployed around the world right now to bring more synergy between these issues, because they are inseparable. The last few years, however, have also underlined how connected our world is with respect to achieving the 2030 Agenda and Sustainable Development Goals. Clearly, whatever we can do to strengthen the synergies, our organizations reinforce each other. And of course, we are also including the Convention on Biological Diversity here. My friend Liu also mentioned the COP15 of the CBD, which is coming up in December. With respect to moving forward, we see two levels of progress. First, at the national level, it is, and the subnational level, it is encouraging the coordination and cooperation of national institutions. This is where synergies need to happen at the national level. Very important that we have different ministries, different focal points, different coordinators, but the synergy will happen at the national level. Similarly, at the global level, we also need more cooperation amongst international organizations within the United Nations framework in particular. This is absolutely needed to create more linkages and to be more efficient in the way we deliver our programs. The UN Climate Change Secretariat is strongly committed to supporting such cooperation on both levels, national and global. Achieving a strong outcome at the upcoming COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, which is happening in only 100 days from now, will also support this work. At the COP, nations must show how they will, through legislation, policies, and programs, begin putting the Paris Agreement to work in their countries. That means that government must show progress in several key areas, particularly on matters of mitigation, adaptation, finance, and loss and damage, amongst other things. Progress in each of these areas will support the sustainability agenda, and this is why we continue to work not only at the UN climate change, but across the UN family to achieve a strong outcome. I'm confident your deliberations today and tomorrow will be useful to the parties as they consider their environmental and SDGs commitments and how they are so closely linked. I understand that scaling up ambition in climate action and strengthening synergies across all sustainability goals is attainable, but I also fully appreciate that it is also challenging. I'm confident, however, that you are up to the task. I really look forward to a strong outcome of this meeting, and on behalf of the UN Climate Change Secretariat, we are ready to support you, and we strongly send you our encouragements. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. TL, and sincere congratulations for your new role and important endeavors with the UNFCCC. We are looking forward to everyone's contribution and a fruitful discussion. So now, Mr. Chairman and Mr. TL, so we'd like to take a picture of you two. So please remain on the screen, please. Cameraman? No? Okay. All right, so we are done taking pictures. Thank you very much for your cooperation. Thank you very much. All right, I would like to now open the floor to some global leaders and high-level representatives of the United Nations to deliver their messages and setting the expectation for this 2 days event. I invite Ms. Amina Mohammed, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations and a Chair of the United Nations Sustainable Development Group, to provide her remarks.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am happy to join you today, and I thank His Excellency Toyoshi Yamaguchi, Minister of Environment for Japan, for hosting this important event. This year, we will mark the 7th anniversary of the adoption of two most critical global agendas, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Agreement. We have made progress, but let us be frank, we are off track on both the SDGs and the Paris goals. We continue to witness the setbacks wrought by the COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and the triple environmental crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. The pandemic has exacerbated issues of poverty, unemployment, debt, widening inequalities, and inflation. As a result of the war in Ukraine, the food and energy crises are spiraling into a global cost of living crisis. And the global emissions are at their highest level ever, with climate change causing severe, widespread, and increasingly irreversible impacts in all regions of the world. We must turn this perfect storm into an opportunity. We can and must purposefully design transitions in renewable energy, climate-resilient food and water systems, and digital connectivity in ways that can also spur economic growth, employment, and equality. I call on everyone to scale up and speed up investments in adaptation solutions that protect people and ecosystems, build resilience for the crises to come, and help realize the SDGs. It is also important to maintain a sense of urgency. Critical milestones are fast approaching, including COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh this year and the SDG Summit in September 2023. We must come together to rescue the SDGs and the Paris goals before it is too late. Thank you for being part of this important effort. I wish you all a fruitful conference.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Secretary General. All right, let's moving forward. I'm happy to introduce our next speaker, His Excellency Mr. Abdullah Shahid, President of the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Maldives. We also have received a video message.
Excellencies, dear friends, It is a pleasure to speak today at this third global conference on strengthening synergies between the Paris Agreement on climate change and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Let me take this opportunity to offer my condolences once again on the untimely passing of former Prime Minister, His Excellency Shinzo Abe. My thoughts and prayers are with his family, the people, and the government of Japan. My friends, among the many lessons we have learned these past few years is how precarious our development can be when not resilient to the shocks of our world. Can we call new infrastructure sustainable if it emits dangerous levels of carbon? Can we call social programs on education, on health, or on food security sustainable if they ignore the need to adapt to a changing climate? I think not. The Sustainable Development Goals, including Goal 13 on climate action, are the framework that should guide our transition to a healthier and a better world. Climate change is cross-cutting. It is interlinked to all other goals, such as protecting our oceans and forests, improving access to clean water and sanitation, ensuring access to sustainable energy, and ensuring sustainable consumption and production. All of these will help tackle global warming and the worst effects of climate change. And put simply, sustainable development is only possible when it is in harmony with and supportive of the environment. And in the same spirit, the climate crisis can only be meaningfully addressed if actions are in accordance with the tools and targets of the SDGs. These two truly transformative frameworks are built to go hand in hand. That is one of the messages that I delivered at the Moment for Nature high-level event in the General Assembly. Reflecting on each of the major environmental processes, summits and meetings of the last year, I emphasized the need to address common bottlenecks such as political will, financing and governance by using the SDGs in a unifying thread, trying and binding all our actions together. My friends, I based my presidency of the United Nations General Assembly on the theme of hope. Nearly a year later, I still stand by that choice. While it is true that the world is ripe with inaction, inequality and injustice, we must recall the immense potential at our disposal. The technologies, the capacities, the skills and knowledge. Together we can achieve remarkable things. This should be cause for hope. Let us work together, women and men, young and old, to overcome our common challenges. Let us push for our recovery from COVID-19 to be guided by the targets of the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. Let us arrive in Sharm el-Sheikh with ambition and action to match. And let us proceed to COP28 with new targets that reflect a new world, a world transformed. Friends, I wish you every success in your deliberations, and I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, President. Next, I'm pleased to introduce His Excellency, Mr. Alok Sharma. He is a member of Parliament, United Kingdom, and President of the UN Climate Change Conference 2021.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be joining you today to discuss our collective work to strengthen the synergies between the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Agenda. That agreement and that agenda provide the foundation for our climate action and for our collective development objectives. And the UK is and will remain at the forefront of this work. With the Paris Agreement set out a framework for keeping 1.5 degrees within reach, the historic Glasgow Climate Pact went further, taking Paris's promises and driving their delivery. Under the UK stewardship, almost 200 countries agreed the pact, concluded the Paris Rulebook, and agreed that all countries must revisit and strengthen their emissions reduction targets to align with the Paris temperature goals by the end of this year. And I'm entirely focused in the UK's COP presidency year on working with all parties to ensure that they deliver on this and indeed other commitments. An emission reduction commitment will be critical to both our 2030 and 2050 targets. And the UK is working to ensure that our collective climate ambition, which was catalysed in Paris and driven forward in Glasgow, aligns with the Sustainable Development Agenda as well. In convening the G7 leaders in Carbis Bay last summer, the UK drove a step change in the G7's collective approach to infrastructure investment in pursuit of clean, green growth. And this ambition was reiterated in El Mao this year. Our new British investment partnerships are harnessing the UK's financial expertise to support sustainable growth around the world. And at COP26, the UK further demonstrated its commitment to today's agenda with a major new funding package for sustainable green infrastructure and revolutionary green technology as part of the Clean Green Initiative. Just Energy Transition Partnerships, or JETPs, will be a critical part of the transition to a just and sustainable future as well. And I'm therefore pleased that we have seen progress since COP26, particularly with South Africa, whose JETP is being backed by $8.5 billion. So friends, the ambition is clear. The work we are doing on adaptation, on finance, on mitigation, and on development means that we can see a path to a clean, sustainable future and ensure that 1.5 degrees remains in reach. But that will only remain the case with concerted and immediate global efforts from all of us and without delay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Concluding today's high-level statements on advancing implementation and synergies of SDGs and climate agenda, we will now hear the voice of the youth, represented by Ms. Jayatama Wiklamanayake, United Nations Secretary General, Envoy on Youth.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Warmest greetings from New York. My name is Jayatma Wiklamanayake and I am the United Nations Secretary General's Envoy on Youth. For decades, the United Nations and other international organizations have embraced the concept of sustainable development to promote well-being and meet the needs of today's population without compromising the needs of future generations. The Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development are both crucial milestones in our collective efforts towards building a better future for people and the planet. In my point of view, both the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda provide us with an ambitious yet feasible roadmap to create a more just, peaceful and sustainable world. Firstly, the indivisible and integrated nature of the Sustainable Development Goals has underscored time and time again that we cannot truly achieve sustainable development and an inclusive recovery from COVID-19 without successfully tackling the climate crisis. Only when climate justice is a reality can we effectively tackle conflict, inequality and poverty. Secondly, in order to cross the finish line of the 2030 Agenda in time, we need to respond with urgency to accelerate progress and meet the 1.5 degrees goal for climate action. The world is experiencing a multitude of crises, not only because of climate change, but also protracted conflicts, the prevalence of diseases, and many other pressing global challenges. There is simply no time left for us to step aside and passively wait. Last but not least, the realization of our climate ambition and the global goals relies on the power of youth. Young people are not just the future. They are the present of this planet we call home. We must involve them in the formulation, implementation, and monitoring phases of decision making as meaningful partners. Together, we must provide adequate resources and safe spaces for youth to amplify their voices and fulfill their aspirations, and most importantly, give young people the opportunity to lead the way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes the first segment of our opening agenda of the conference. Thank you very much. Welcome to the second segment of the high-level opening, where we will dwell on how to raise ambition on climate action and the SDGs, taking into consideration our current progress, opportunities, and gaps. I'm joined today by some distinguished stakeholders representatives that will contribute to the discussion with their remarkable expertise. Now let me introduce our distinguished guests for this panel. Professor Hossein Lee, Chair, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. A professor will join remotely this time. Ms. Sandra Wu, Chairperson and CEO, Kokusai Kogyo Company Limited, UN Global Compact Board Member. And Ms. Vibha Dhawan, Director General, the Energy Research Institute, India. Ms. Sheila Opalaucha, Executive Director, Energia. Opalaucha also joining us remotely. And Mr. Miles Ponon, Founder and Chief Executive Officer, ASEAN Youth Advocates Network. Professor Kazuhiko Takeuchi, President, Institute for Global Environmental Strategy, Tokyo, Japan. We will proceed with the panel session together with the distinguished guests I have just introduced. So, dear distinguished guests, thank you very much for joining us on this occasion. Thank you. So, first of all, Professor Lee, I'd like you to kick off this panel session. In its most recent assessment report, the IPCC has reflected on the importance of a synergetic policy. So, could you please share with us the most important observation of the panel?
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation to this very important meeting. The IPCC released three very important reports since August last year, and they are critically important for policymakers and stakeholders at all levels. It confirms that the human influence is causing climate change, making extreme events more frequent and severe, and global warming will exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius and 2 degrees Celsius during the century, unless immediate, rapid, and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions occur in the nearest future. Climate impacts and risks are becoming increasingly complex and more difficult to manage. They occur simultaneously and will interact with other threats, further aggravating the overall risk and cascading across sectors and regions. Every small increase in warming now and beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius will result in an increased risk of severe impacts, some irreversible. Globally, approximately 1 billion people living in low-lying cities and on the coast are projected to be at risk from rising sea levels. Climate change will increasingly undermine food security and nutrition for the people in sub-Saharan Africa, South Africa, Central and South America, and all small islands. Regions highly dependent on snowmelt will be vulnerable to water shortage for agriculture if warming continues. The risk of species extinction increases by about tenfold as warming rises to 3 degrees Celsius, which would likely to occur if the current trend of warming continues. The time for climate action is now. We know how to limit the global warming, and more countries are taking climate action. We can have emissions by 2030. The next few years in this regard will be very critical. Solar energy, electrification and greening in cities, energy-efficient appliances, improved forest and crop management, and reduced food waste are all technically viable. Let me emphasize that they are increasingly cost-effective and generally supported by the public worldwide. However, financial flows are a factor of 3 to 6 below the levels needed by 2030 to limit warming to below 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Celsius. We found that the challenge of closing this gap is the widest for developing countries. Globally, there is sufficient capital and liquidity to close investment gaps. But what's lacking is clear signaling from governments and the international community, including a stronger alignment of public sector finance and policy. Major regulatory and economic instruments ranging from standards for vehicle efficiency and building codes, land use and zoning, to policies for renewable energy and industrial decarbonization, to broad-based carbon taxes and emission trading systems, have already proven effective in reducing emissions. Such measures can be strengthened and expanded. I want to emphasize that accelerated climate action is critical to sustainable development. No country alone can tackle climate change. This is why I cannot stress enough the importance of international cooperation in achieving ambitious climate goals. In conclusion, there's no time for half measures and lip service to climate action. Delay in action will lock in more warming and lost opportunities for a sustainable world. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lee. So next I'd like to ask Ms. Wu. As you're chairperson and CEO of a private sector, right? So the private sector plays a pivotal role, not only for economic and social development in general, but also for environment and climate protection. So Ms. Wu, please let us know about the recent important private sector initiative that promote climate SDGs synergies or avoid trade-off.
Yes, thank you for the question, and I'm honored to speak on behalf of the private sector. Yes, we do have quite a few initiatives, but the most important private sector initiative in this space is the Science-Based Target Initiative, so-called SBTI. Our company, Kokusai Kogyo, also committed and also get our target verified last year, 2 years ago. So this is an initiative that drives ambitious climate action in the private sector by enabling businesses in setting science-based emission reduction targets. It was created back to 2015 and has a sharp rise in interest in recent years. So the SBTI represents a very serious level of commitment and the ambition of business. The targets are verified by experts, and the act of setting targets requires us a very extensive stock-taking process. So today there are over 3,300 businesses committed to set this science-based target. About half overall have their targets verified and are taking action as we speak. And about a third overall had set the net zero by 2050 targets. But we must remember that there are over 200 million companies around the world. So 3,000 companies is just a drop in the bucket. There's something we really need to realize. And elsewhere, there are many practical and effective initiative that holds business accountable through their reporting process, such as TCFD promotes the climate-related risk reduction, and TNFD promotes biodiversity-related risk reduction. These are all important and well-structured initiatives, but because they require a lot of efforts on the part of the company, it is in practice only doable only by the global large companies and excludes most of those 200 million companies around the world. So today, the majority of businesses, regardless of whether they are in this initiative or not, realize that the key issues of our world today are interconnected. So trying to solve one environmental issue may cause issues in several other environmental issues. For example, how renewable energy development can cause negative effect on global biodiversity, as pointed out by IPCC and the IPEBS in 2021. And everyone knows it gets even more chaotic when you consider socioeconomic repercussions. So business understand that the model of making profit by selling more stuff on that uses up more resources, increases carbon emissions, and leads to waste and disposal is not good for environment at all. So business understand that we will forever be playing catch up on environmental issues as long as we do our business based on a model built on environmental profitability trade-off. So therefore, more and more business today are coming up with new business models, ones that try to avoid trade-off and avoid mass production, mass consumption, and mass disposal. There are automobile manufacturers who now offer car-sharing services because they realize that cars they sell are not used around the clock. And also the music and the entertainment industry adopts a subscription model because they understand that owning hard copies such as CDs and the DVDs are no longer necessary. So business are about a competition, and we have now begun a competition to come up with the new business models, ones that do not necessarily negatively affect the environmental or society. So I think more than the initiatives, this is what will transform the business, the new business model. So all or most of the business, and also transform the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Wu. Definitely the role of the private sector is going up more and more. So now, Ms. Dawan, I would like to ask you as a Director General, the Energy Research Institute. At present, energy security is again a priority concern in many countries, right? So ensuring energy security and advancing investments in renewable energy, Ms. Dawan, how can these goals be compatible? I mean, how do you think you can track the two goals? So do you want to share with us your thought and perhaps from your perspective of India?
Thank you so much for the question, and thanks to the organizers for giving me this opportunity. Well, India, if I'm frank, we are energy-starved country. And in fact, much of our development has got affected because our rural areas are very recently got electrified, many areas, and it was initiative of the Prime Minister that every village should be electrified. So that's a positive direction. The other is I take it more as an opportunity because we are still developing energy security as a country. And therefore, we have option to go for the cleaner way. Not to say that we are committed for phasing down of coal, but at the same time, that's the only fossil fuel that we have, and it's going to take us some time to go for the new technologies or the renewable way of generating electricity. India as a country, I'll say we have invested a lot in renewable energy initiatives. And our Prime Minister in Glasgow, he gave the commitment that by 2030, 50% of our energy will be from the renewable sources. So that's a very bold statement, and in a way that also gives confidence to those who are investing in renewable energy. And of course, one is looking at whether it should be the decentralized way, because we can also generate at the rural level and use it there only rather than taking it to far off places. But also the other project is one sun, one grid, one planet. And therefore, it's something like there is solar energy generation in some part or the other on this planet, and which can be used without creating that much of storage facilities. So that's also an option, and time will tell us what is going to be the best way. Now, in terms of renewables, we are also looking at the mobility sector, and electric vehicles, they are becoming very popular in our country, and let's hope that by 2030, perhaps 25% of our fleet will be through electric vehicles. But that's one is looking at, and I'll put it this way, it also depends on what other renewables, what are the developments in the other sectors. So one is looking at hydrogen in a very big way, and hopefully, and rather I'll say that the larger companies, they are already in discussion for tech transfer. But we should also realize that India is a country of small and medium enterprises, and it becomes extremely important that they also have access to the latest technologies. And thus, I like to suggest over here that we really need to come up with the ideas that you get the technology, because there is no plug and play kind of model. You have to indigenize them to your requirements. And therefore, you set up facilities, you buy the technology, indigenize it, and give to all the possible users. And last point I'd like to say is that we also need trained manpower. And therefore, while we are working on new technologies, we should also work on how to get the right manpower, because success of technology depends on how well it is adopted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Darwin. Thank you very much. So now let me ask Ms. Opalaocha. Your distinguished expertise, specialization, and advocacy work related to the many dimensions of social inclusion, including women, the youth, and the vulnerable. So how can climate action and progress on SDGs become better synergized so that the transition can truly truly go all and leave no one left behind? What do you think?
Thank you for the questions, and greetings to all. I thank the organizers for inviting me to participate in this important conference, and I'm honored to speak on this very distinguished panel. Let me start my intervention by reminding us that the United Nations has clearly stated that one of the principles of the SDGs is that they are integrated, indivisible, and balance the three dimensions of sustainable development: the economic, social, and environmental dimension. Ensuring this balance and addressing interlinkages is thus key to global efforts to address climate change and achieve the 2030 Agenda. Yet a review of the status quo, such as the Global Sustainable Development Report commissioned by the UN, concluded that little progress has been made on interlinking the various SDGs. For example, the report found that SDG 5 on gender equality's influence on other SDGs is silent or significantly weak for 8 SDGs, including that on climate, responsible consumption, partnerships, and energy. Similar trends are also observed when it comes to planning for climate action. The German Development Institute and the Stockholm Environmental Institute jointly analyzed 160 nationally determined contributions and found that the NDCs focus more on environmental and economic goals and less on social goals such as on health, education, and gender equality. These gaps have critical implications because we know that development interventions and climate change can have differential impacts on different stakeholder groups, and that groups with fewer resources for addressing these impacts, such as poor women, youth in developing countries, and other vulnerable groups, are the worst affected and least able to mitigate externalities. To address these challenges and allow for inclusive planning that yields multiple benefits and catalyzes intersectional progress between the SDGs as well as the global climate targets, please allow me to propose 5 planning principles. The first principle is adopting a people-centered approach in which women, youth, persons with disabilities, ethnic and other minorities are facilitated to meaningfully contribute to policy processes and to benefit as both producers and consumers of technologies, products, and services that facilitate the SDGs and climate action. This also requires that decision makers, including those from governments, private sector, and civil society organizations, are accountable to the needs and aspirations of different social groups. In this way, the no one left behind principle is not just an outcome, but is embedded in planning and policy-making processes. The second principle is using a multi-stakeholder approach in which there is collaboration and collective actions towards common goals in addressing the multifaceted nature of the development and climate challenges we face. Thirdly, we are learning from increasing frequent natural disasters, such as the heat waves that are currently happening in Europe, the COVID-19 pandemic, the various economic and political crises, that we cannot achieve sustainable progress on the SDGs or the Paris Agreement without building resilience. This could include, for example, strengthening robust local value chains that will not only provide local decent jobs, but also reduce vulnerability to disruptions in global supply chains, or providing social safety nets such as inclusive stimulus packages and other forms of liquidity support to female and youth-led businesses that tend to be more economically challenged. Finally, all the aforementioned principles would be futile without financing. Yet the reality is that many developing countries already struggle to meet their ongoing development needs. And this is exacerbated with the ongoing food, fuel, and financial crisis. That's at COP27 in Egypt this year, and at the SDG Summit in New York in September 2023, a key point of attention will be whether commitments to official development assistance and climate funds, both for mitigation and adaptation, will translate into real-time investments and grants that promote inclusive and just transitional pathways. In this regard, we're encouraged by the commitment of the Japan International Cooperation Agency, JICA, setting a new goal of $15 billion to be mobilized for the G7 2X Challenge financing for women. We congratulate Japan for showing leadership through action as it assumes the G7 presidency next year. In conclusion, distinguished participants, allow me to share a good practice example of a solution. This relates to the work of the SDG7 Technical Advisory Group. The SDG7 TAG is a multi-stakeholder group whose membership is diverse and inclusive. The TAG, that is convened by the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, has since 2018 produced annual policy briefs to inform the high-level political forum by taking stock on progress on energy interlinkages with other SDGs. This year, the TAG has made great strides in proposing potential indicators that quantify and track the interlinkages between energy and SDG 4 on education, SDG 15 life on land, SDG 5 on gender equality. Next year's edition of the policy briefs will build on this work and address the remaining SDGs. This body of work serves as an international best practice on how to strengthen the foundation for inclusive, evidence-based decision-making. Thank you for your attention.
Ms. Obaracha, thank you very much for sharing these important points. So I'd like to ask Mr. Ponon. You are founder and chief executive also ASEAN Youth Advocates Network, right? So I totally believe that decisions of the present generation may affect the living condition of future generations. So how does the Youth Advocates Network, you belongs, promote greater investment in a more sustainable future?
All right, thank you so much, distinguished guest. Thank you so much for inviting me, especially on behalf of the organizers. And to start, as the founder and the chief executive officer of the ASEAN Youth Advocates Network, let me tell a quick story. It did not start as big as it is today. It started in the Philippines. Now it is present in 10 Southeast Asian countries with the vision to make advocacy a lifestyle, not only for the youth to think, not only by theory, but to also take action. Strategic action to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and the local development goals of their respective communities through their own capacities. And that is why we want them to be equipped with the skills, focused on civic education, for them to have the values anchored on our mission to be that platform that molds young people for a sustainable future, as they are not only stakeholders of tomorrow, but also today. And so one big data that I always have struck me until this very day is that only 1 out of 10 are considered to be active youth participants in their own country. Approximately 14%, 14 out of 100 young Southeast Asians. Our population right now, 180 million. And that is why we have the mission to focus on 4 pillars, still anchored on the Sustainable Development Goals that starts with global citizenship education, democratic engagement, community building and well-being, and of course, climate alliance. And with these 4 pillars, we have already conducted 30 programs that has led us to reach more than 200,000 Southeast Asian youth. Outside of this, one thing that I would always tell is to always step out of our comfort zones and boundaries, and at times try to be restless, as the challenge is an emergency that the youth have to face today. But of course, fueled by empathy and all the necessary capabilities mentally and physically to adapt and to be ready to reimagine and hope for the best in our respective communities. And that is why outside of my organization that I have established, I still continue to be part of the decision-making processes in where I live in Manila, in the city of Manila, and also being part of WWF Philippines as to make sure that there is a platform to engage and empower more youth to change the ending for the planet, which I believe is very essential, as that is why we are all in this synergy today. That enables me to invest in progress and support clean, renewable energy sources, to recognize and support the private sector that provides solutions, as we understand, as what we have heard earlier on the importance of what the private sector is, and to support decision makers and leaders who have transformative and sustainable plans and policies. And that is why I would like to end and reintroduce myself today. I am Emmanuel Myros Ponon, a 21-year-old advocate today that started to volunteer at 9 after experiencing exclusivity. Today, an advocate of sustainable development from the Philippines with a goal and vision for the youth to care, participate, and reimagine, to again hope, to see the potential in the challenges that we are facing, to continue to work on the 2030 agenda. I end with sharing 2 questions that I ask myself every day that I have mentioned earlier. If no one will do it, then who? If not today, then when? As my mentor would always say, the youth is tired of waiting for the world to change. Today, the world is waiting for us, the youth, to change it. Thank you so much and a great day to all.
Thank you very much for your explanation, Mr. Ponon. Thank you very much. So the last person I will ask is Professor Takeuchi. I believe that scientific research provides an important foundation for decision-making on climate and the SDGs. So IGES has initiated and contributed to important studies in this area. So, and also that contributed to compiling the conference background note. So what will be the most important area of work for IGES in the years ahead?
Thank you very much for this very good question. The most important agenda for IGES is to strengthen the link between science, policy, and society interlinkages. For example, I would like to emphasize that IGES is hosting both the IPCC and the EPBES. So IPCC is, of course, on climate change. And we are responsible for the technical support unit of inventory, which is very, very important. If we try to scientifically pursue the voluntary national reviews and voluntary local contribution. And therefore, our contribution seems to be very important. And also, we are hosting a technical support unit of EPBES. And we were responsible for the secretariat of the assessment on Asia and the Pacific. And we finished. And then we are now responsible for the invasive alien species, which is also very important issues in order to control all the ecosystem issues around the globe. And therefore, the science-based approach is very, very important. And nowadays, our mission is try to integrate rather fragmented discussion between the climate change, biodiversity, and many other SDGs related issues. And therefore, I'm very pleased that IPCC recently conducted a scientific report jointly with the EPBES. And also, this has been influencing to the global negotiation processes. If you look at the Glasgow, they adopted the Forest Declaration by inviting of many member states, including Japan. And so previously, forest issues related with the biodiversity and other things are not related with the climate change. But now we need to consider about the linkage between the two. And therefore, the Synergy Conference is quite timely in order to further promote the synergy among these different global challenges. And then I would like to emphasize the importance of the collaboration between the countries. IGES has been collaborating with TEDI on promoting of the technology transfer. And one idea is we call co-innovation. It means that not just to export the Japanese technology to India, but we learn from the India how we could apply our technology in the Indian context, and so that we could further improve our technology systems. So this is a kind of a win-win situation. And so this type of the progress needs to be further pursued. And also in the Philippines, we are having a collaboration with the many stakeholders in the Philippines, and we are conducting the field research work in the Laguna Bay area, focuses on the issues of climate change adaptation. Our way of promoting our project is to communicate with the different stakeholders, not just to conduct our field research work by ourselves, but also inviting of different stakeholders in order to appropriately adapt to the changing climate. So there are many sort of things that we could do based on the science. And also we need to further try to develop this scientific-based discussion onto the global negotiation, as well as the participation of the individual countries, and the local governments, private sectors, many other stakeholders. So that is what we are doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'd like to hear more from the panelists, but unfortunately time is running out. So we have 6 panelists with different perspectives. So all of them were filled with very many of hints for creating a new era. So once again, thank you for the very inspiring and valid viewpoints. Thank you very much, panelists. Thank you very much. On behalf of the co-organizer and on behalf of the audience who have followed our conversation, whether in person here it is distinguished U-Thant Hall at the United Nations University in Tokyo, or online at their respective workstation all around the world. I'd like to thank all of you for having been with us at this panel and for sharing with us your thoughts and your expertise and your insights. This panel has indeed put forward very important background and the viewpoints which will form a very useful base for the deliberation scheduled for tomorrow. So many thanks again and best wishes to all of you. Thank you very much. Right, we are now approaching the final part of today's opening discussion on how to advance the full implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and accelerate the transition to a carbon-neutral economy. With my great honor, I'd like to open this segment with the intervention ministers and from heads of over United Nations organization and an agency working on various aspects of climate and SDGs synergies. Firstly, let us see the statement of His Excellency, Mr. Kostas Kadis, Minister of Agriculture, Rural Development and Environment of the Government of Cyprus.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, first of all, I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to share the perspective of my country, Cyprus, in this important conference dealing with the cross-cutting issues of climate change and sustainable development. Accomplishing the objectives of the Paris Agreement and fulfilling the vision of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is a race that we can still win if we act with unprecedented urgency to raise the level of our ambition and to accelerate the implementation of measures of these critical agendas. Strengthening the synergies, appropriately assessing trade-offs, and acting with more coordinated action can only bring us faster to the anticipated results. The impacts of climate action and sustainable development goals efforts vary between countries and regions. As a small country with limited resources, Cyprus realizes that without concerted collective cooperation and synergies at regional level, our actions will have a limited effect. Therefore, in addition to our efforts as a member state of the European Union, Cyprus is escalating climate action through its own government's initiative for coordinating climate change actions in the Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East. The initiative aims to develop a regional action plan in cooperation with Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East countries to support the countries of the region in fulfilling their obligations under the Paris Agreement and to address and adapt the effects of climate change. Under the context of the increasing commitments for climate change and sustainable development, our vision is to portray on what countries can achieve when they work together. Thank you.
Now I'm pleased to present the following statement. His Excellency, Mr. Adrian Peña, Minister of Environment of Uruguay. This will be delivered in Spanish.
En primer lugar, agradecer a los organizadores del evento y en particular al Ministerio de Ambiente de Japón por ser el anfitrión de esta tercera conferencia global sobre el fortalecimiento de las sinergias entre el Acuerdo de París y la Agenda 2030 para el Desarrollo Sostenible. Es un honor para Uruguay participar de esta instancia. Uruguay considera la Agenda 2030 y a los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible como una herramienta indispensable, la cual permite atender los desafíos asociados al desarrollo de una manera que promueva respuestas inclusivas que tengan como finalidad no dejar a nadie atrás. Nuestro país se encuentra fuertemente comprometido con la Agenda 2030 y también con la acción climática, la cual entendemos debe ser ambiciosa y con un enfoque social, nuevas oportunidades de desarrollo y empleo de calidad. Uruguay se ha destacado como un país pionero en la implementación de medidas tempranas de mitigación, en particular en el sector energético, donde en los últimos años se alcanzaron porcentajes de renovables en la matriz eléctrica mayores al 95%. Estos avances notorios en términos de generación eléctrica permiten plantear escenarios de reducción de gases de efecto invernadero en sectores como el transporte, además de haber lanzado la Agenda Nacional para el Desarrollo del Hidrógeno Verde. En otro orden, el país viene trabajando de forma muy importante para lograr una producción agropecuaria cada vez más sostenible, protegiendo los ecosistemas naturales, la biodiversidad y cuidando los suelos de la erosión a través de diferentes políticas, planes y programas desde hace ya varias décadas. Hemos elaborado 3 planes nacionales de adaptación al cambio climático. Uno para el sector agropecuario, otro para la adaptación a costas y otro para la adaptación a ciudades e infraestructuras. Además, a 2025 tendremos un plan de adaptación para el sector energético y otro para el sector de la salud. Hemos presentado nuestra estrategia climática de largo plazo con una meta aspiracional de CO2 neutralidad al año 2050 y nos encontramos trabajando en nuestra segunda contribución nacional determinada que presentaremos en este año con una mirada al año 2030. Uruguay entiende que las sinergias entre el Acuerdo de París y la Agenda 2030 contribuirán al accionar conjunto para cumplir con las metas a las que todos estamos comprometidos. Muchas gracias.
The next statement, His Excellency Mr. Mohammed bin Mubarak bin Zayed, Chief Executive Officer and Special Envoy for Climate Affairs, Supreme Council for Environment, Kingdom of Bahrain.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me speaking this afternoon. The 2030 Sustainable Development Goals agenda and the Paris Agreement are notable achievements in the strive for stability for all mankind. In 2022, we reflect on our progress to the halfway point to the SDGs deadline. It's crucial to ensure that our efforts are both preserved and accelerated. Our collective experience in pursuing climate and sustainable development goals has showed that their synergy are not undeniable. They are key to the prosperity of generations. The Kingdom of Bahrain has recognized this truth for decades. Since 2008, the Kingdom 2030 economical vision placed sustainability at the heart of its long-term development strategy. The whole of government approach has led to integration of the SDGs within Bahrain government action plans across all sectors. Further recognize these synergies, Bahrain is championing climate actions alongside its pursuit of meeting of the SDGs by 2030. This includes a 30% greenhouse gases reduction by 2030 and a commitment to reach net zero by 2060. Ladies and gentlemen, the SDGs and climate goals are universal in nature. Their attainment contribution to the prosperity of all nations, rich or poor, developing or developed. Today we stand witness a unique time in history. Global climate actions under the Paris Agreement is finally transitioning from its negotiation phase to implementation. Across the globe, countries are emerging from COVID-19 pandemic to implement their recovery plans. We hope this opportunity is used to transform societies and drive progress without leaving anyone behind. Thank you.
Now let us know the comment of His Excellency Mr. Munir Akram, Permanent Representative of Pakistan to the United Nations and Chair of Group of 77 and China.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to address the third Global Conference on Strengthening Synergies between the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda. The year 2015 was a milestone in the Sustainable Development Agenda. Witnessing the adoption of both the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement, climate change impacts all three dimensions of sustainable development: economic, environmental, and social, and also impacts multiple targets across the SDGs. The energy transitions envisaged in SDG 7, sustainable industrialization under SDG 9, sustainable food production systems and resilient agricultural practices under SDG 2, all imply low emissions development pathways. Hence, strengthening synergies between the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda will require a significant transformation, particularly in three key economic sectors, that is agriculture, energy, and industry. Specific strategies to move these sectors towards sustainability is key to achieving our common sustainable development and climate goals. In this regard, enhanced investments in sustainable infrastructure, in clean energy projects, irrigation infrastructure projects, or sustainable industrial projects will be a vital part of a transformation strategy for sustainable development and realization of the Paris Agreement's goals. Pakistan has initiated a group of friends on sustainable infrastructure in order to mobilize action towards this aim. We are looking to promote two major objectives. Firstly, the full utilization of the UN Development System, including the Resident Coordinator System, to assist developing countries to prepare sustainable infrastructure projects. Secondly, to set up a UN mechanism through which these projects can obtain financing from public and private sources. In the current international scenario, where the global south is facing multiple existential crises, the achievement of both the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement is in jeopardy. Concrete actions are required, in particular, to accelerate the momentum for the achievement of the SDGs within these remaining 8 years of the decade of action. I thank you.
We will now hear a statement of His Excellency Mr. Walton Alfonso Webson, Permanent Representative of Antigua Barbuda to the United Nations and Chair of the Alliance of Small Island States.
To address you on behalf of the 39 members of the Alliance of Small Island States. Excellencies, Paris Agreement and the SDG synergies are built into the design of both processes. Our urgent challenge is the lethargic pace of implementation. In the 30 years since the United Nations Climate Convention was founded, the current military operation in Ukraine and resulting energy crisis cannot prevent us from staying the course to limit warming to 1.5 degrees with no overshoot. I wish to highlight 3 synergies that focuses on implementation. First, urgently phase out fossil fuel subsidies. This alone could cut global emissions by 10%. By 2030, improve public revenue, macroeconomics, and yields sustainable development benefits for us. In contrast, the nearly $6 trillion that subsidize coal, oil, and natural gas in 2020, an enormous sum, you will agree, for just 1 year, is distorting markets and inhibiting new inclusive energy ventures at a detriment to both climate and development agendas. My second point, adopt a multi-vulnerability index to unlock concessional financing for small vulnerable countries falling through the cracks. Small states are overly dependent on imports with single economic sectors and small and often remote populations. GNI per capita, you will agree, is not really a complete development indicator. This we have argued for many years. My third point, the international community must create a facility under the United Nations Climate Convention to finance activities that address the questions of loss and damage. Climate change is already causing widespread loss and damage. Small island developing states can no longer afford to absorb the cost of emissions from others that we have no blame for. Small states, colleagues, excellencies, are highly exposed per capita to climate impacts, yet we are the least responsible for the climate crisis. All small island developing states together only emits 0.6% of global greenhouse gas emissions in 2019. Yet, some of our member states have lost over 200% of GDP in one hurricane in 24 hours. In closing, Paris and the SDG synergies must focus on implementing systems change to peak global emissions and safeguard vulnerable communities against the warming already locked in. Beyond 1.5 degrees, sustainable development for SIDS will be compromised, and we will simply not get there. I thank you.
We will now hear the statement. Excellency, Ms. Yordanka Lodica Yordanov, State Secretary of the Ministry of Environment of the Republic of Moldova.
Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Ministry of Environment of the Republic of Moldova, I have a great pleasure to greet all of you to the third Global Conference on strengthening synergies between the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The first conference held in 2019 put the accent on synergy to avoid discrepancy and to join effort to sooner and better achievements in common, bilateral and individually, but under the same task and assumptions.
hope this conference will serve as a platform for discussions on financial mechanisms and rules for getting solutions to environmental issues. How to promote sustainable development and ensure environmental integrity and transparency, following the guidance adopted by the Conference of the Parties. In June this year, in Bonn, on the negotiation of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, the Republic of Moldova supported the joint crediting mechanism proposed by Japan. We have implemented in common the Clean Development Mechanism projects with clear methodology, following monitoring, reporting and verification system. The clear rules help to facilitate the diffusion of leading decarbonizing technologies and infrastructure through investment by developed countries, thereby contributing to greenhouse gas emissions reductions and removals and sustainable development in developing countries. It is important to act in common for achievements of the country's national determined contributions while ensuring the avoidance of double counting through corresponding adjustment and the approved sustainable development goals. For each activity, there is an imperative goal under the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development to be aligned and implemented under clear financial mechanisms being monitored the progress and results. As a candidate country of the European Union, we will continue and enhance the development of policies and legal frame transposing the European Union directives into the national legislation. The focus is to achieve the updated national determined contribution declared in March 2020. We need synergy at the global and regional level in order to achieve the assumptions at the national level. I wish all of you a fruitful conference and hope to meet all at the COP27 in Egypt. Also wishing that the conclusions and recommendations of this conference to be realized. Thank you.
Now it's my pleasure to invite Mr. Yuji Kuroiwa, Governor of the Kanagawa Prefecture, Japan, to make his statement. Governor will be speaking at U-Thant Hall.
Good evening from Japan. I'm Yuji Kuroiwa, Governor of Kanagawa Prefecture. It's a great honor for me to have this opportunity to address such a distinguished gathering. Kanagawa Prefecture is the second most populous prefecture in Japan with over 9 million people. As a governor, I have been working on creating a society where all people in our prefecture have vibrant inochi. Inochi is a Japanese word that is usually translated as life in English. But actually, it actually has a broader meaning that includes well-being, positive spirit, purpose in life, healthy longevity, full of laughter, good community, and environment, all grounded in one essential part, diversity. So, what is our ultimate goal? Well, we cannot create a society where no one dies or no one can get sick. However, we can create a society where everyone can smile and shine into old age. A society where people support each other, where laughter abounds, and where each individual's life shines brightly. That is a vibrant inochi we are striving for. In order to each person's inochi to shine brightly, it is important to consider not only medical care, but also food and energy, as well as the sustainable global environment that support these elements. We seek to integrate all of these into one vision. This vision embodies the philosophy of the 17 integrated goals of the SDGs in Kanagawa's own way. And it is truly an initiative based on synergy. As part of these efforts, Kanagawa has set the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 46% from 2013 levels by 2030, with the public and private sectors working together to realize a decarbonized society by 2050. I urge everyone here to learn from the ideas and best practice that will be shared at this conference. Lastly, all of you, let's work together to change the world for better future and vibrant unity with mission, passion, action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Governor. So, we will now hear a statement of Ms. Amida Salucia Alice Jabana, Executive Secretary, United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific.
Excellencies and distinguished participants, it is my pleasure to join you at this global conference and speak on the synergies between the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We are meeting at a critical juncture as countries face the unfortunate circumstances of multiple crises. The world is slowly recovering from COVID-19 pandemic and its profound socio-economic impacts, as well as dealing with the persistent effects of climate change. Hence, strengthening synergies is an urgent priority for the Asia-Pacific region, which is responsible for half of global greenhouse gas emissions and is home to 6 of the top 10 countries most vulnerable to climate-related disasters. However, our region lags in progress towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, with some goals seeing regression, with Goal 13, Climate Action, the most notable in regression. Meanwhile, during the pandemic, over 80% of ESCAP member states announced commitments to carbon neutrality by mid-century, and many of the countries enhanced their 2030 target. The aggregated level of the target is not sufficient to support the global target of 1.5 degrees. However, it is an important step, having the majority of countries recognize carbon neutrality as the direction of the economic transition. Now it is speed and scale of action that we need to mobilize at regional and global levels through strengthened synergies with the 2030 Agenda. First, making rapid progress in Goal 7 on affordable and clean energy by scaling up renewables in a national energy mix and regional power interconnection, and improving energy efficiency to reduce the energy intensity of the economy. Second, linking climate action with Goal 8 on decent work and economic growth, and Goal 9 on industry, innovation and infrastructure to diversify the economy, particularly fossil fuel dependent economies, develop decent work for just transition, and expand climate smart trade. Third, strengthening national action on Goal 12 on responsible consumption and production to reduce and phase out fossil fuel subsidies, amounting to over $200 billion per year in Asia and the Pacific. Fourth, harnessing Goal 14 on life below water and Goal 15 on life on land through ocean-based and nature-based solutions, which are key to achieving carbon neutrality and saving time until the full deployment of zero carbon technologies. Excellencies and distinguished participants, on this pathway, it is critical to scale up global and multilateral partnership under Goal 17. We look forward to enhancing our partnership for climate action as we navigate out of the crisis and refocus on progress in the 2030 Agenda. We stand ready to support the efforts, and I wish you all of you a fruitful conference. Thank you very much.
We will now hear a statement of Ms. Olga Alugayarova, Executive Secretary, United Nations Economic Commission for Europe.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, without real and large-scale climate action now, there will be no sustainable development. At halfway for the 2030 Agenda, the UNEC region is on track to achieve only 26 of 169 SDG targets, according to our 2022 progress report. For SDG 13 on climate action, we are not on track for any target. We must accelerate progress on resilience and adaptive capacity and reverse the current trend to fully integrate climate change measures into national policies. Time is running out to correct course for the SDGs, and the code red of the latest IPCC report cannot be ignored. We must therefore seize every opportunity, focusing on the co-benefits of action for the SDGs and the Paris Agreement can be a powerful catalyst. We know, for instance, that tackling fossil fuel combustion is not only vital to cut greenhouse gas emissions, but also address the air pollution that kills 7 million people worldwide every year. Countries' emissions reductions under our binding regional air convention avoid hundreds of thousands of premature deaths annually. We can learn from this experience to scale up action in all regions. We also know that investing in more efficient resource use and the circular economy is vital to cut emissions and unlocks many benefits for the SDGs, from green jobs to biodiversity protection. Countries are already seizing UNEC's normative and regulatory tools to support concrete action, including for the critical raw materials needed for the green energy transition, but we must urgently accelerate these efforts.
Next, we will hear the statement of Mr. Chu Dongwei, Director General, Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the climate crisis continues to threaten global food security and nutrition under the SDGs. As many as 828 million people around the world were undernourished in 2021. And the COVID-19 pandemic has pushed 150 million more people into the hunger since 2019. SDG 13 climate action is cross-cutting on many of SDGs, including SDG 2 and the hunger, as well as SDG 1, no poverty, and others. We must transform our ecosystem to be more efficient, more inclusive, more resilient, and more sustainable, and to make them an important part of the solutions to the climate crisis and to achieving the SDGs. If a new strategy on climate change will help us deliver together with the partners innovative solutions at all levels. In synergies with our new science and innovation strategy, which will ensure that science, innovative solutions, and technical tools are at the forefront of work. Transformation is critical to achieve the objectives of the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Science and innovation are the key accelerators to achieve this change. We need to invest more in innovative actions with a long-lasting impact, together with the data, coherent policy, and strong institutions. We need actions that strengthen the interlinkage and synergies between climate, water, soil, energy, biodiversity, and agri-food systems. The sustainable use and the restoration of our ecosystem and natural resources is vital to achieve our global objectives, as set out in the SDGs, the Paris Agreement, and the 3 Rio Conventions. And the integrated approach and the synergies are fundamental to achieve the better production, better nutrition, better environment, and better life for all, leaving no one behind. I thank you.
Now we will hear the statement of Ms. Inga Andersen, Executive Director, United Nations Environment Programme.
Look, if we are to hold global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and trust me, we want to do that, we must have greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. But the climate crisis is not a standalone threat to the planet. It's part of the accelerated triple planetary crisis, the crisis of climate change, the crisis of nature and biodiversity loss, and the crisis of pollution and waste. Solutions to climate change are often solutions to the rest of the planetary crisis, and they are most definitely solutions that increase the chances of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. A rapid shift to renewables backed by increased energy efficiency would reduce emissions, would tackle energy poverty, and would cut air pollution. Deploying nature-based solutions such as ecosystem restoration and green infrastructure would cut emissions, would build insurance against zoonotic diseases, and would protect people against heat waves in cities. And reducing food loss and waste would cut emissions too, while increasing food security and reducing the pressure on vital resources such as land and water. And backing the global deal to create a circular plastics economy would also cut emissions, while of course protecting the ocean, protecting species, and protecting livelihoods. Shifting the global financial system back to sustainability would reduce emissions, would boost the entire Sustainable Development Agenda. So virtually everything is a synergy with something else. Action on the climate agenda is action on the nature and pollution agenda, and vice versa. And action on all three is the essential underpinning to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals.
Now we will hear the statement of Ms. Elizabeth Maluma Mulema, Executive Secretary, United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity.
Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, there is a growing recognition of the critical links between biodiversity, climate change, and sustainable development. Because biodiversity provides so many services to human societies, it is at the center of the biggest challenges the world faces, from climate change to poverty eradication, food and water security, health, and sustainable development. Biodiversity contributes to the achievements of almost all the Sustainable Development Goals. However, the science is clear that on the current trajectory, biodiversity will continue to decline with profound consequences. Immediate transformative changes are therefore needed. This is essential in sectors that depend and impact on biodiversity, many of which are also critical sectors for mitigation and adaptation to climate change, food and water security, and preventing risks from future pandemics. There's a pathway that allows us to build a future where life is in harmony with nature and where the contributions of biodiversity to our own well-being are valued by all. This is what the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, presently under negotiations, sets out to achieve, to transform society's relationship with nature, to ensure that by 2050, humanity is living in harmony with nature. The framework is intended as the world's roadmap for actions for biodiversity, complementary to and supportive of the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, targeting each of the direct drivers of biodiversity loss, including climate change, as well as underlining social and economic drivers, the framework will require and will serve to foster integrated whole of government and whole of society approaches to implementation. We all recognize that an ambitious and coordinated approach to the interconnected global challenges is urgently needed. This conference will provide us with that opportunity to create partnerships and mobilize actors so that together we can work towards the necessary transitions to build a better future for all. For that, I offer my sincere appreciation and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. We will now hear the statement of Ms. Heidi Schroeder-Fox, Acting Under-Secretary General and High Representative for Least Developed Countries, Landlocked Developing Countries, and Small Island Developing States.
Excellencies, distinguished participants and colleagues, for the world's most vulnerable countries, we simply cannot afford to fail in our ambition to drive more coherence between the Paris Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. Accelerating the implementation of the 2030 Agenda is critical for more effective climate action. The energy transition and energy efficiency goal encompassing in SDG 7 will contribute significantly to lowering emissions and meeting the objectives of both the Paris Agreement and the other SDGs. To our host in Japan, I want to share my sincere condolences on the recent tragic loss of your former Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe. It was in the shadow of another tragedy, the Bataclan attacks in 2015, that world leaders gathered in Paris to agree bold new climate goals. On that occasion, Prime Minister Abe said these words, and I quote, "Today, we must demonstrate our ability to overcome overwhelming challenges with our solidarity, no matter how different our nations or cultures are." End of quote. This, I think, is a fitting guiding principle for our discussions today. Our starting point must be an honest assessment of where we are. Carbon emissions are meant to be falling by 45%, but in fact they are rising by 16%. For the poorest people in the world, the cost of that failure is life-changing and life-limiting. People, ecosystems, and livelihoods in the most vulnerable countries suffer disproportionate damage from climate change. They are least able to recover from climate shocks, and their economic growth is highly dependent on climate-sensitive sectors, ranging from agriculture to ocean-based industries like tourism and fisheries. 40% of deaths from disasters take place in least developed countries, although they make up to only 14% of the world's population. Small island developing states are faced with an unholy contest. Which will drown them first, rising debt or the rising seas? For the groups of nations as well as landlocked developing countries, we need to deliver finance, science and technology and innovation, and capacity building from the international community to address specific vulnerabilities. As you look to develop tangible outcomes from this conference, I urge you to heed the words of the Secretary General and keep vulnerable countries first in our plans, first in our investments, and always first in our actions. I wish you a successful event, and I hope to see many of you in the 5th Conference on Least Developed Countries in Doha next March. I can assure you that the Paris and SDG agendas together will underpin everything we seek to achieve there. That will also be the case as we meet to discuss future programs of action on behalf of the small island developing states
and the landlocked developing countries later in 2023. Thank you very much.
Now we will hear a statement of Mr. Woo Chom-eun, Managing Director General and Officer in Charge, Vice President for Knowledge Management and Sustainable Development at the Asian Development Bank.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, greetings to you all. Thank you for inviting me to speak at today's session. I'm grateful to the UN Department of Economic Social Affairs and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change Secretariat as co-organizers and the Ministry of Environment of Japan as hosts. This conference's theme of synergies between the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is of critical importance as the world faces multiple crises including the COVID-19 pandemic and climate crisis. ADB is helping Asia and the Pacific tackle the immediate effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and to promote a green recovery. Addressing the impacts of the pandemic and supporting long-term development are not mutually exclusive. ADB elevated its ambition to provide $100 billion in cumulative climate finance between 2019 and 2030. As Asia and the Pacific's climate bank, ADB is fully committed to supporting clean energy transition and Paris Agreement alignment. Through our initiatives, we are pursuing synergies between climate action and the Sustainable Development Goals. When we support climate mitigation, we promote just transition, which is a critical approach to ensure that no one is left behind in the clean energy transition. When it comes to climate adaptation, we explore nature-based solutions which can bring multiple benefits including on biodiversity. As for those ADB projects, including those whose primary purpose is not to tackle climate change, ADB is aligning such projects with the goals of the Paris Agreement. To conclude, let us work together for a prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable future for all through enhancing synergies. Thank you very much.
Now we will hear a statement of Ms. Mami Mizutori, United Nations Assistant Secretary General and a special representative of the United Nations Secretary General on disaster risk reduction.
Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the Global Assessment Report 2022, which the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction launched this April, projects a 40% increase in disaster occurrence from 2015 to 2030 if the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction is not implemented. Risk-blind decision-making and investment creates new risks. This will diminish the benefits of climate action and impede the achievement of the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. Time is against us with the gains of sustainable development lost to the pandemic and the climate crisis. We must take courageous, transformative steps to get back on track before 2030. Countries must adopt integrated approaches recognizing the systemic nature of risk. Countries must scale up comprehensive disaster and climate risk management. Technical assistance to developing countries must be increased in order to minimize risk creation. We must increase our financing for risk reduction and ensure that all investments, both public and private, are risk-informed. Importantly, all this must be done in an inclusive manner and through leadership. We have the possibility to make positive change by pushing for the integration of risk reduction in the key intergovernmental processes which will take place during 2023. These are the high-level meeting of the General Assembly on the midterm review of the Sendai Framework, the SDG Summit, the Summit of the Future, and of course, the Paris Stocktake at COP28. Together, we must act now to safeguard our future and protect the well-being of people and our planet. Thank you very much.
Now let us now hear the statement of Ms. Sandra Ojiambo, Assistant Secretary General and Executive Director, UN Global Compact.
Ladies and gentlemen, business leaders and friends. Greetings, I'm Sando Jambo, Assistant Secretary General and CEO of the United Nations Global Compact. And it's an honor to join you at this third global conference on strengthening the synergies between the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. As we are all aware, climate change is no longer a distant threat. Its impacts are accelerating with every fraction of a degree the temperature rises, endangering people and ecosystems worldwide. Time for meaningful action is quickly running out. While reducing greenhouse gas emissions to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement is absolutely essential, climate action comes in countless forms and must reflect the needs and priorities of vulnerable communities. By addressing the Sustainable Development Goals, we can tackle the climate crisis holistically, ensuring that no one is left behind. We believe that the private sector has a vital role to play in overcoming these challenges. Businesses, especially those headquartered in the G20, must take the lead and make credible, verifiable net zero commitments, investing in renewable energies and creating decent green jobs in the communities where they operate. The UN Global Compact offers businesses the tools that they need to create the transformation the world needs, such as practical guidance on how to take impactful action on climate, improve gender equality, conduct due diligence on human rights, and ensure that workers in their supply chain are paid a living wage. In the spirit of the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, I invite business leaders to join the UN Global Compact, follow our 10 principles on human and labor rights, protecting the environment and fighting corruption, set ambitious science-based targets to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions, support and protect your staff, workers and their communities to ensure just transition to a net zero world by 2050. As the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres reminds us, the effort required is extraordinary, but so too are the possibilities for bold action when people work together. So let us work together and translate our climate ambitions into successful climate actions. Thank you.
Lastly, we will now hear a statement of Mr. Keiji Nishizawa, Chair, Keidan Line Committee on Responsible Business Conduct and SDGs Promotion. Mr. Keiji Nishizawa is also the Chairman, Keidan Line Committee on Nature Conservation and the Director Chairman of Sompo Japan Insurance Incorporated.
私は経団連の企業行動 SDGs 委員長、そして経団連自然保護協議会会長を務めております損保ジャパンの西澤でございます。日本の経済界を代表して一言ご挨拶をさせていただきます。まずは本日環境省の皆様の発足のもと国際会議の3回目の会合が東京で開催されますことを心よりお祝い申し上げます。さて、私ども経団連では京都議定書が採択される前の1997年から気候変動を極めて深刻な問題として捉え、先進的な行動計画を推進してきました。この計画は我が国の産業及びエネルギー転換部門の9割をカバーしています。そして同年には循環型社会形成に関する行動計画の推進も始め、現在では生物多様性分野の制限と合わせて3つの分野での環境統合経営を推進しています。しかし大変残念ながら気候変動という地球規模の問題は悪化の一途をたどっています。そこで昨年の6月、2050年カーボンニュートラルを目標として掲げるカーボンニュートラル行動計画を打ち出しました。さらに本年5月には提言グリーントランスフォーメーションに向けてを公表しています。この提言は気候変動に対する企業の事業活動を経済成長や 産業競争力につなげていくことを目指した内容となっております。また経団連ではソサエティ 5.0 for SDGs を掲げ、技術革新などの企業の事業活動を通じて SDGs の実現を目指すよう会員企業に呼びかけております。そしてこれらの取り組みにおいて留意しなければならないことは、単に SDGs の個々の目標達成を目指すだけではなく、我々は世界全体を持続可能で包摂的な社会へとトランスフォームさせることを目指さなければなりません。今回の国際会議の議論が気候変動や生物多様性、また人権の問題など SDGs の課題に対する企業の取り組みをさらに加速させるものと期待しております。本会合の成功を記念し、私からのメッセージとさせていただきます。ご清聴ありがとうございました。
This concludes the high-level segment. Many thanks to all distinguished speakers for their statements. The co-organizers of the conference are indeed very grateful for your active participation, for your respective contributions, and for your support of raising ambition in climate and SDGs action. Your thoughts will help in advancing more synergetic approaches. Your guidance will also be helpful to avoid and minimize trade-offs. Your contributions have shown that transition to a more sustainable future is not only needed, it is possible, and it's likely beneficial for all. Lastly, we'd like to thank you for all of your participation, and thank you very much for the audience of your attention. All good health for all, and best wishes for good evening to participants in Asia. A good day to participants in Africa and Europe, and good morning to participants in the Americas. Thank you very much.